everyone, I'm Dr. Duke, and welcome to part one of our new lecture series, The Socialist Destruction of Education. This is going to be an interesting one, I think, because education plays a key role. It doesn't matter if you're trying to bring democracy to a country that doesn't have it, or to bring fascism to a country that does. The fact is that education is key. Getting control of the minds of young people is going to determine what happens in the future. People of our age, people who grew up after World War II, before the millennial generation, we still had stronger ties to a more patriotic America because that's the way we were raised. We were raised with the Pledge of Allegiance. We were raised to be respectful of the flag. We were raised to recognize the importance of our constitutional republic. But over the last 20, 30 years, we've not been educating kids that way. In fact, we've been educating kids the opposite way. We have been teaching young children to despise our country, to despise our heritage, to see our founding fathers as mere racists, to undermine free markets. This is a classic recipe for a very different America. And again, whether you're preaching radical fascism or you're preaching constitutional republic, it has to start with your children. If we don't grow up a generation of kids that admire and understand and are willing to buy into the complicated nature of freedom, we will lose our freedoms. And so what I want to do is talk about how socialism going back 150, 170 years, and its attitude towards education has been playing, as many people have pointed out, they're playing a long game, the socialists, right? That what has happened in America in the last 10 years along socialist lines would never have been imagined 50 years ago. And so we've reached a point where socialist education, because that's where they're winning. They're not converting 30, 40, 50, 60-year-olds to socialism. People like Bernie Sanders really aren't that popular when you look at the national electorate. They're not that popular. And it was a shocking survey that came out a couple days ago where they were asking people if would they ever vote for a socialist. And about 4 out of 10 said absolutely not, but they were all Bernie supporters. It tells you something, right? That even though Bernie Sanders is perhaps the most open and vocal socialist in American public life right now, many people don't even know he's a socialist, particularly kids. Younger students and college students don't quite know what socialism means. So I want to take some time and explain the long game that socialists play. Let's go back to the founder here of socialism, Karl Marx. Education is free. Again, if you remove the picture of Marx and I said this was Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren, I don't think you'd see a single difference between them. Education is free, Marx said. Freedom of education shall be enjoyed under the condition fixed by law. Well, then, is it really free, Karl? May I point this out? If you're arguing, Karl Marx, if you're arguing modern socialists, that education is free, it's a human right. Freedom of education shall be enjoyed, but it will only be enjoyed by under the conditions fixed by law and under the supreme control of state. Do you see the game Marxists play? Because your modern Democrat politicians are playing them too. Education is a human right. Everyone has a right to be educated. Everybody should have free education. Only it should be completely controlled by government. And I like his use of the word supreme here is right. This is the fantasy of all left-wing Democrats, progressives in America today, that it will be fixed by law education, which means Common Core, which means bigger than Common Core, the ESSA Act. It means that the federal government alone will dictate ultimately what happens and how it happens, and the supreme control of the state. Do you ever ask yourself why presidents like Obama, one of the first things Obama did when he became president was put forward a bill to get rid of charter schools in Washington, D.C., right? Even though many minority kids, even though many inner cities, Washington, D.C. has some of the worst public schools in the country, and that's saying something, first thing he did was squash that for families, particularly black families. Why do they do that? Why do progressive leftists hate charter schools, hate Catholic schools, Christian schools, parochial schools, hate any kind of schooling, homeschooling, hate any kind of school outside of state control? All goes back to what Marx is telling you here. They understand, the socialists, that unless everyone is subordinated and subjected to the government, if every aspect of American life, and there is no aspect of American life, not healthcare, not economic viability, not job security, not social services, there is no aspect of American life that requires greater education, greater care than education does. And so education was something they worried about immediately. Education is free, Marx said. Freedom of education. Notice how they use the buzzwords. Shall be enjoyed, but under the condition fixed by law and under the supreme control of the state. You can't have freedom when the supreme state controls everything. It may be free in terms of moms and dads don't write checks for the education themselves directly, but what is confiscated by the state to then return an inferior form of education is where we find ourselves in America today. Huge confiscatory real estate property taxes, huge confiscatory referendums over and over again, where money is turned over to the state then uses that to educate your kids badly, and whenever it fails, as it always does, state-controlled education, their answer is more money and more control. That's what they want. Have you noticed, Mom and Dad, if you've been watching the Dr. Duke show, how much of parenthood, parenting responsibilities beyond education, the schools have appropriated them to themselves? They're teaching your kids morality. They're teaching your kids politics. They're teaching your kids ideology. They're teaching kids environmentalism. They're teaching your children radical sexual education in the youngest grades now. So you give them all this control, and the state is not content simply to teach your kids educational values. They're teaching them world, political, and ideological values. Marx continued, the education of all children, from the moment they can get along without a mother's care, shall be in state institutions, at state expense. Arnie Duncan, on his way out, Barack Obama's Department of Education secretary, actually posited the idea that maybe we ought to have public boarding schools. Maybe there are some kids we should have 24/7. This idea that as soon as a mother's care is no longer necessary, and in the modern age, with all the modern technology we have, when is it, according to the state, that a mother is no longer necessary for a child? We're getting to the point now where preschool kids, 3, 4 years old, 2, 3, 4 years old now, the clamor is for free and mandatory. That's the thing about Marx's quote here. You can't have free and mandatory. That's exactly what they're doing, and that's what today's modern progressive wants as well. Free. The education of all children from the moment they can get along without a mother's care shall be in state institutions and wholly at state expense. I threw this other quote from Marx in at the bottom as well. Democracy is the road to socialism. Yep, Marx pointed that out. For all of you democratic socialists out there, for all of you misguided individuals who keep telling us that socialism is already part of what America is, that socialism, it just hasn't been implemented correctly. Please pay attention to what your founding hero said, because Marx understood it well too. And he understood that democracy is the road to capitalism. That without democracy, it's much harder to get to a communist system, a socialist system. And this is the argument that's being made here, right? We have a constitutional republic, and one of the reasons why America has been able to fend off more or less socialism for at least 150 years is because we're not a democracy. We are a constitutional republic, and that's a big difference. The checks and the balances. Why do you think it is educationally? Why do our younger kids being taught that the electoral college has to go? We have to get rid of this idea that we have representative, balanced government that we get through these kinds of initiatives. When Marx says democracy is the road to socialism, particularly through education, that's what he means. You need democracy, which is more or less mob rule, right? Everybody recognized this. De Tocqueville recognized this. The ancient Greeks, who gave us the word democracy, recognized that pure democracy was nothing more than mob rule. It was jungle politics, right? The mob, the majority rules. Marx was right. You have to get to democracy, get away from a constitutional republic, undermine those checks and balances, and get to teach kids to believe we are a pure democracy. And if you can get them to believe that, then you're already halfway to socialism. That's the key, right? Because there are always going to be people with more money. Right? No matter if you make $100,000 a year, there's people making $3. If you're making $300,000 a year, there's people making $5. And if you're making $40,000, $50,000, $60,000 a year, 95% of the American society is making more money than you. And so consequently, what? Use the idea of democracy to vote away people's protections, right? Simply by mob rule, because there are more people making less than there are making more by definition in any functioning economic system, because that's true. Let the have-nots vote themselves what the majority have. Was it Ben Franklin? Somebody, I remember, one of the founding fathers made the astute observation that we will remain a constitutional republic until Americans realize they can vote themselves other people's money. I mentioned that Karl Marx was really a poor economist. He was a failed economist. Nothing he proposed was going to make people wealthier. Nothing he proposed was going to build wealth or give people greater independence or a higher quality of life. He was not really even an economist. Let's be clear. He was a sociologist, right? He was a social scientist. He was a manipulator of data. He was somebody who wanted to use ideology to transform the way people think and primarily to use education to do it in order to remake the world. Does that sound familiar? Think about the modern university today. Think about social sciences and modern universities, all dedicated to social justice. And social justice is nothing more than the working out of socialist doctrine in modern education. Our second slide is from Vladimir Lenin. Again, Marx was a theorist. Lenin was one of the first guys who was a thug who gained power, the Bolshevik, who gained power at the backs of tens of thousands of dead to force the ideology, right? So we now see what happens when you go from the theory of socialism to its practice. And Lenin made it very clear as far as education went. He said, give me 4 years to teach the children, and the seed I have sown will never be uprooted. 4 years. You had to go to college for 4 years. That's why I think the 4 year is really important here. When Lenin says, give me 4 years to teach the children, and the seed I have sown will never be uprooted, I think what he's telling you is college was enough in the past to do it. But what has happened recently in American education? You have the pulling down of this social justice, socialist worldview from the colleges over the last 25, 30 years, down into the high schools, down into the middle schools, and down into the elementary schools. It's a lot of iterations from that. Goals 2000 under the Clinton administration, No Child Left Behind had aspects of this, certainly Common Core. We've been moving, and you know really the irony of this? We really started moving down an overtly socialist path in American public schools when we created the Department of Education. Here we are, a constitutional republic, although you ask the average college kid today, they'll tell you we're a democracy. You ask the average high school sophomore today, and they'll tell you that we are a democracy, because remember what Marx said, democracy is the road to socialism. So this constitutional republic of ours in the late 1970s under Jimmy Carter, we create the Federal Department of Education. So a huge federal organization usurping unconstitutionally the role of education in the United States away from the states and away from local communities and codifying it. Well, this was only going to go one way. The only way it could go was the great march through socialism. But Lenin said, give me just 4 years. We're now giving them preschool all the way through college now, to give your kids the same kind of socialist education. Give me 4 years to teach the children, he said, and the seed I have sown will never be uprooted. Give us the child for 8 years, all right? That would be K through first grade through ninth grade, right? Give us that same child for 8 years, and the child will be a Bolshevik forever. And look, you see how far ahead of their time the Soviets were? They don't even use the he or she pronoun, right? Give us the child for 8 years, and it will be a Bolshevik forever. Give me just one generation of youth, just one entire generation, and I will transform the whole world. The goal of socialism is communism. Now, let's watch that beautiful thing, right? You see how, for Marx, democracy was necessary for socialism. And you see Lenin say it very clearly. And you can't get to communism until you make that middle leap of socialism. Again, I say to you, these tyrants, these ideologues, they told you exactly what they had planned, right? From Marx to Lenin is one stone's throw, right? 6 degrees of separation, right? This is degree number 1. From Karl Marx to Vladimir Lenin. And notice what they've told you if you look at their combined statement, that you have to have democracy to get us to an idea of socialism. Right? Mob rule. We can vote your stuff for ourselves. And socialism then is that necessary intermediary step between democracy and communism. That's a pretty shocking statement from Marx. And if you look at it one more time, one generation. So 4 years, they'll never change from what I make them. 8 years, they will be mine forever, and nothing can move them. And you give me one whole generation to educate these kids, and we will change the world. The goal of this socialist education is inevitably a communist worldview. And if you look at the degree to which the major socialist movements in this country, including what you see coming out of academia and what you see in our presidential candidates on the Democratic side, is moving rapidly towards a communist sense. Socialism is too tepid for many of our radicals. Think about the revolutionaries in the streets. Think about Antifa, right? They're so anti-fascist that they are communist. Right? And that's why people don't understand this. People ask me the question all the time, how can the Antifa be so fascist and fighting fascists? And I would argue that maybe they're not. That maybe what they really are is communist. And then you say to me, Dr. Pesta, is there a real difference between communism and fascism? And my answer would be philosophically and ideologically, no. In terms of how the details, how the sausage is made, there might be differences, but not philosophically and ideologically, as we will see in the course of this show. We move to our next slide. Joseph Stalin, right? 2 degrees of separation from Karl Marx, and somebody much more ambitious and much bloodier than even Lenin had the ability to be. Stalin, a generation later, said, education is a weapon. It is a weapon whose effect depends on who holds it in his hands and at who it is aimed, right? Think about the degree to which we have weaponized modern public schools to cut parents out of the process, to not let kids opt out, to not even send notifications home to parents anymore when they're doing things they know that parents would object to. Look at the way we've weaponized the schools in turning out anti-American, anti-capitalist, largely illiterate kids who have these pronounced political viewpoints, but they can't explain them to you. You've all seen people going to the high schools and the colleges, sticking microphones under college graduates' faces and asking them to explain any basic aspect or function of American government, and they can't do it. Education is a weapon, the socialist knows, whose effect depends on who holds it in his hands and at whom it is aimed, right? And it's aimed at you, the republic-loving American people. Ideas, Stalin said, are far more powerful than guns. That's why, by the way, the American Republican Party, the rhinos of the Republican Party, were losing this country through them, in part because they don't realize this. American conservatism doesn't really realize anymore on the grassroots that it's ideas that ultimately change the world. It's not guns, it's not laws, it's not constitutions. We've got to get behind the idea of ideational conservatism, right? Making cases for arguments. Stalin continues, we don't let our people have guns. That's exactly right. We don't let our people have guns. Why should we let them have ideas? Now do you understand that when guns are under threat, not because of anything guns have done, guns are under threat primarily because the controlling socialist majorities, increasing majorities in this country and the Progressive Party, have recognized that ideas and guns are 2 steps on the same road. Guns represent liberty, they represent independence, they represent the ability to fight back. We want an American people that can't fight back. And one of the ways you do that is through ideas, right? Get them to vote away their own gun rights if you can't take them. And this is an important quote along the spectrum we've been talking about here. Notice that education must become weaponized. Democracy is necessary for socialism. Socialism is necessary for communism. And education, a weaponized brand of education, is necessary for all of it to take place. And here's the funny thing. The socialists and the National Socialists, the Nazis, the fascists. Again, I know you know it, but many don't. The National Socialist German Workers' Party, that was the Nazis. They were German socialists. Oh, yeah, they made enemies of the Bolsheviks. Well, they allied with the Bolsheviks in the Ribbentrop Pact before they betrayed the Soviets. But they had the Nazis and the Bolsheviks recognized, at least up until Hitler lost his mind, they recognized certain things in power that they had in common. Collectivism, all the things that we've been talking about here. Here's a direct quote from Adolf Hitler making that specific point. Hitler said, "We are socialists. We are enemies of the capitalistic economic system. That's what we are. That's why you had the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, because the socialists of Russia and the socialists of Germany had way more in common with each other than they did with free markets and American republicanism. We are socialists, Hitler said. We are the enemies of the capitalistic economic system for the exploitation of the economically weak. We are against its unfair salaries with its unseemly evaluation of human beings according to the wealth and property instead of responsibility and performance. And we are all determined to destroy this system under all conditions. Again, take Hitler's picture away, take Adolf Hitler's name away, and go back to that quote. This is mainstream modern socialism today. We are socialists. What does that mean to the modern socialist? We are enemies of capitalism. We see capitalism as merely exploiting the economically weak. We see it as unfair salaries, wealth envy, unseemly evaluations of human beings according to wealth and poverty. This is the kind of stuff your kids are getting in their classrooms on college every single day. And it's not just in sociology, it's not just in economics, it's in their English classes, their history classes, their philosophy classes. That was Hitler before he got power. Here's an empowered Hitler. The state must declare the child to be the most precious treasure of the people. We have to convince people that they have to turn over their freedom, turn over their guns, turn over their ability to educate their own children. We have to convince them to do it for the kids. Here is Hitler reminding you that the propagandistic way we will convince people to give up their freedom and their liberty is to say it's for the benefit of the kids. It's a lie. The state must declare that the child is the most precious treasure of the people. As long as the government is perceived as working for the benefit of the children, the people will happily endure almost any curtailment, any at all, of their liberty and almost any deprivation. We will get people to endure any personal deprivation, giving up their homes, giving up their houses, giving up their freedom, their cars, giving up, and all of this global warming tax, all this social carbon taxing stuff. It's exactly this. If we tell them little Greta Thunberg shall lead them, right? If we tell them it's for the children. And now, do you see how insidious the left is? Now you've brainwashed children to tell the adults that you have stolen from us. This is unacceptable. You have robbed me of my childhood. Time magazine gives this odd little socialist and the Times Person of the Year award. And you've listened to Greta, right? This is pure socialist indoctrination. You scratch the surface. Now she's not even hiding it. She's not even really talking about the environment anymore. In her most recent interview, she said, really what this is about, she said, is fighting patriarchy, fighting capitalism, right? Fighting free markets, changing the whole world. But we're going to hide behind the global warming mantra to make you feel bad for the kids. Remember just 10 years ago, 12 years ago, your kindergarten kids were being exposed to an inconvenient truth by Al Gore in kindergarten, coming home and lecturing you about using plastic wrap and killing polar bears. This is how the children will be used. Hitler told you directly what was going to happen. And now, the next slide, full on Hitler, right? Says, when an opponent declares, I will not come over to your side, I calmly say, your child belongs to us already. What are you? You will pass on. Your descendants, however, now stand in the new camp. In a short time, they will know nothing else but this new community. And tell me it's not true already. Your middle schoolers and high schoolers know nothing else but this new community of social justice. This is what we've done, right? I mentioned at the outset of this lecture series, right? We have already been forgotten by the progressive left. Those of us who are over 40, right? We were educated in a different time, in a different era. We are passing. They're waiting for us to die off. They've already got their hooks deeply into the under 40s. They're already part of this new community, right? And that's the thing. Jump ahead to another socialist fascist, Benito Mussolini. And here's what Mussolini said. Fascist education is moral, physical, social, and military. Think about the rabid moral certainty of the left-wing progressive. Think about the linking of that to physicality, to materialism, to social life, to social values. All of these things. And now you've reached the fourth stage, right? The socialists have already moved through the moral reasons for social justice education, the physical and the social. Now they're militarizing, aren't they? Go back to Antifa. You want to know why the progressive left is getting more physically violent? Because they've walked through the fascist socialist paradigm. They've gone through the moral, the physical, the social, and now at the stage of militarizing it. This kind of education, Mussolini says, it aims to create a complete and harmoniously developed human, a fascist one, according to our views. Harmony, right? A harmoniously developed person. One who is put together educationally, mentally, psychologically, social emotional learning in the schools now, right? It's not enough to teach your kids facts, what many moms and dads believe kids go to school for. No. Now we're teaching facts through sociology. We're psychologically evaluating your kids. For an evil right-wing fascist like Mussolini, this sounds suspiciously like progressive socialism because there's not ideologically and philosophically all that much difference between the two things. And one more. Antonio Gramsci, the Italian fascist who was imprisoned before the fascists actually took control in Germany. Here's what Gramsci, very influential fascist, here's a socialist. Here's what he said. Socialism is precisely the religion. Bingo! Socialism is precisely the religion that must overwhelm Christianity. And again, all you see about this, everything we've pointed to in the beginning, this first segment of the show, points to the fact that socialism is a religion. It is a replacement for God. It is the removal of God in favor of a purely materialistic economic kind of religion like this that will dominate every part of your life. Gramsci said, socialism is precisely the religion that must overwhelm Christianity. In the new order, the new world order, George Bush the first said, right? In the new world order, socialism will triumph by first capturing the culture via infiltration of students. We will infiltrate students first. The universities, the church schools, the media, by transforming the consciousness of society. That's what's been going on for 40 years. We are at the micro level of education, we are transforming the social values, the social worldview of American children with great success. That's how we will inculcate them in a new religion. And if you have seen Greta Thunberg in action, you see how this works. Think about everything we've talked about in this past hour. Look at her. Take pity on her. She's a tool, right? A blunt one, but she's a tool, right? That has been filtered through exactly what American school kids are getting now, right? She's a Swede. Look at how Swedish education is about 20 years ahead of where we are, but we're closing the gap quickly.